Well, good day everyone, and it's time for a little bit of mathematical literacy again. Guys, today we are doing a phenomenal topic. One, though, that causes quite a few problems in the matric exam every single year. And so we're going to take a little bit of time looking at this topic. And the topic we're going to look at today is the one on Mapwork. All right, let's have a look at my screen here. Now, under this whole topic of Mapwork, we are going to look at different plans, and then as well, we are going to look at maps. And the type of plans we're going to look at is building plans, as well as seating plans. And by seating plans, what do we mean? Well, if I walk into a soccer stadium, for example, I walk in and I got a ticket, and the ticket says, your seat, pal, is A43. Now, you know what? If you go into a huge soccer stadium, you are not going to know where seat A43 or A42 or A anything is, okay? Unless you know how that stadium is actually arranged. And we might be looking at something like that later on. So, we're going to be looking at those plans, different seating plans in a soccer stadium, might even be in an exam venue. In fact, I know we're going to be looking at a question like that shortly, where someone is sitting in an exam venue and they've got to find their seat. Right. We could also be looking at seating plans, for example, in a theatre. All that falls under the umbrella of seating plans. And then, if you look at our screen, you can see we're also going to be looking at maps, and we're going to be looking at various types of maps. Now, folk, you can get road maps, which show the national routes. So, for example, if I want to travel, I don't know, let's say from Pietermaritzburg to Joburg, what route am I actually going to follow? If I'm driving from Cape Town all the way through to Polokwane, what national road am I going to follow, and what route am I going to take? Okay? So those are national road maps that we look at. We could also then hone in a little bit. Instead of looking at huge routes from one city to another, we could look at maps of actual little cities or towns. So let's say, for example, I'm traveling from Johannesburg to Pietermaritzburg. I could look at a national road map. How do I get from Joburg to Maritzburg? Now that I'm in Maritzburg, oh my goodness, how am I going to find my way around Pietermaritzburg? Then we look at a different type of map, a little city map of Pietermaritzburg. Okay? Let's say I'm going to stay at a friend's house and he lives in a huge complex. Now, I need a little layout map of that complex, because some complexes can be rather difficult to drive in. Okay? You could get to a complex and there's a huge gate. And inside that complex, there are 500 different little houses, or 500 different little simplexes or duplexes. And you've got to find one specific one. And there are a whole lot of roads and things inside that complex. Then we need a little route map, or a little map, or a little scale map of that complex, so we can figure our route around. Do you understand? So maps can be huge things, and then they can narrow right down into tiny little areas. Okay, well, I think we should get going. So let's look at our very first question here. Now, our first question comes from the November 2011 paper 1, and it was question 3.3. The following seating plan was used for Zoe's first semester examination. Zoe's examination number was 2111411112. My goodness, that's a huge exam number, isn't it? And you matrics, I'm sure by this stage you've already got your exam number, and it's also quite a long number, hey? And always remember, don't forget that number, and whatever you do when you write your exam, make sure you put that right number down on your book. Okay, so Zoe goes into an exam, she's sitting down, that's her number. Now, what's our first question? Our first question is this: identify the row and the column in which Zoe sat. Okay, so before I determine the row, and if you look at this, my rows are going across my page. My columns are going down my page. So we've got to actually find out what row and what column is Zoe sitting in. Well, let's find her number, shall we? Now, we know her number ends in 1112. So I'm going to look for digits that end in 1112. Here it is right over here. Let's just make sure we've got the rest of the numbers correct. So it's 21114, 21114, 1112. That's where Zoe is sitting. The question says now, what row and what column is Zoe in? So when we look at it, I'm going to say, well, that's easy. Zoe is in row 5 as well, because there she is, and column 2. That's her seat over there. So it's quite simple. It's going to be row 5 and column, which one was it? Column 2. Okay. Straightforward, isn't it? But we had to be able to identify. This would have been a great paper 1 type question. Right, let's go on to the next part of that question. The next part says this: how many students sat in the same column but behind Zoe? All right, folks, now, before we know how many students sat behind her, we've got to know which is behind and which is in front of her. Now, if we look at our map, we can see here, invigilator's table. Now, folks, we know that normally the invigilator is in the front of the classroom or in front of the hall. So we're going to presume that our front is where the invigilator is. Now, if Zoe is sitting in row 5, column 2, there's Zoe, and the front of the classroom is that way, we want to know how many students sat in the same column but behind her. Well, let's have a look. There's this student, and that student, which means 3 students sat in the same column but behind Zoe. Right, our next one. Determine the general direction of the emergency exit from where Zoe sat. Okay, so there's Zoe, and we now want to know which direction is the emergency exit. So if she's writing her exam and someone suddenly shouts, "Fire!" Zoe's got to get out of there. Okay, which way is she going to run? Here's my emergency exit, right here. Now, which direction is she going to go in? Now, folks, she's going to run from her table and go in this sort of direction. Okay. Now, we need to know what direction is that arrow actually pointing in. Well, the first thing we've got to know is, well, what's north, what's south? Okay. That's important. Now, in this map, if you look at it very carefully, there is no north arrow anywhere. Can you see that? I'm going up and down and I can't see a north arrow. Now that's very, very, very naughty of this examiner. So I'm going to say, let's pretend my north is in the front of the classroom. So if this is my northerly direction, then we know this is my easterly direction, this is my southerly direction, and this is my westerly direction. Remember with directions, west and east, some people get confused. It's quite simple, hey? We spell the word we, okay? So it's we. There you can see we. We are going to get an A for our Maths Lit exam this year. Now, which direction is she going in? Can you see the way this arrow is going? It's round about in this direction over here. What's that direction? That direction is southeasterly direction. Does that make sense? So our answer then is, you know what, Zoe, when they shout fire, you get up and you bolt. But you bolt in a southeasterly direction. Okay, next question. My next one says this. Examination rules state that each candidate must occupy an area of at least 0.75 meters squared. Calculate the minimum total area occupied by the students in this examination venue. I don't know where they get this from, but apparently there's a rule. And this rule is saying that each student must have a nice area to work on, and that area must be 0.75 square meter worth of area. In other words, what is 0.75 square meters? It means that the length and the breadth, okay, whatever the length is, whatever the breadth is, when I multiply that length and the breadth, I must have an area of at least 0.75 meters squared. So what's the minimum area that I can have? Well, if that area is 0.75 meters squared, and folk, I'm going to presume then that it's not only the area in which the kids are riding, but the area around them as well. Okay? So let's read it again. The examination rules state that each candidate must occupy an area of at least 0.75 meters squared. That means 0.75 meters squared for each candidate. But how many candidates are there? Well, we're going to multiply by, now we've got to check how many there are. And if you look, how many columns do I have? I have a total of 4 columns. How many rows? A total of 8. So how many candidates is that? Well, if I've got 4 columns and 8 rows, 4 times 8 is 32. So I've got 32 candidates. There they are. Okay? Now we can work out the minimum area that I need in that room for all 32 candidates. And our calculator is going to do that for us. So we're going to take out our calculator and say 0.75 multiplied by 32 equals, and there's our answer, 24. So we need 24. But folk, 24 what? 24 meters squared. And I knew it had to be in meters squared because I'm working in meters squared. And the question was, calculate the minimum, look at it, total area. So I have to have units squared when I work this out. Okay. Folk, I think this is a great time for a break, and then we're going to come back, and then what we're going to do is we're going to look at one of those huge maps I was talking about earlier, where we try and find out, well, what happens if I'm traveling from Maritzburg to Joburg? What route am I going to follow? And what kind of map am I going to use? I'll see you after the break. Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're looking at maps, right? And just before the ad break, we looked at different plan, okay? And it was a plan of an exam venue. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at a real good old real-life map. Let's read this question. This question comes from our November 2011 paper, and it was a paper 2. Now, as soon as I hear it's a paper 2, I know there's going to be quite a bit of work involved with the questions. A lot of application to the basics that I've learned. Let's have a look at it. The Naidu family lives in Pietermaritzburg. A map of South Africa showing the national roads marked N1, N2, etc. is given on the map below. So let's have a look. So there's the map of South Africa. Now, there's just a few things I want to point out to you. The first thing I want to point out is this funny little looking thing there. All right? With a whole lot of lines and a whole lot of numbers. Now, folk, obviously that is a scale, but it's a special type of scale. We call it a picture scale. All right, or a bar scale. And that scale is showing me how far 300 kilometers is on the map. So if you look at the scale, it's saying, oi, from this point here to this point here, okay, that is 300 kilometers. So if I took that distance and found it anywhere on the map, it would represent 300 kilometers on that map. Now, as we look at the map as well, we can see that there is a whole lot of national routes. So we're traveling from Maritzburg to Joburg. So we're going to start in this little funny little town here called Pietermaritzburg. And we're going to end all the way here in Johannesburg. Now, how do I travel from Maritzburg to Johannesburg? Well, you can see it's quite easy. Hey, there's this wonderful route over here, and this is called my N3. There it is there. Lovely route. What happens if I was traveling from Cape Town to Joburg? I know we're not asking that now, but let's just look at it. Well, if I was traveling from Cape Town to Joburg, I'm starting here in Cape Town all the way to Joburg. Well, now there are a number of routes I could actually follow, isn't there? Let's have a look. I could actually go along this route here. What is this route here? This is called the N1, all the way past Bloemfontein, all the way to Joburg. Or I could just make a bit of a left turn just outside Beaufort West. So after passing Beaufort West, I'm now going to go along this route, which is called my N12. Let's say I wanted to take a scenic route and I wanted to drive along the coastline because I love the sea. Well, what could I do? I could follow along the N2, go past Mossel Bay, George, Knysna, all the way to Port Elizabeth, go on through past East London if I wanted to, okay? Then through Umtata, down to Port Shepstone, Durban, and then follow the route on from Maritzburg onto Gauteng following the N3. Okay? So there are a number of routes I could follow. And you know, folk, when people travel from one city to another, a lot of people say, you know what, I want the quickest and shortest route. But there are some folk who say, you know what, are we on holiday? Let's tour around South Africa. Let's take out this map and find an alternative route. A nice scenic one, perhaps. Or perhaps they can say, you know, I'm going off from Cape Town all the way to Joburg, but I've got family living in Uppington. Shame, imagine having family in Uppington. But let's pretend you've got family in Uppington and you want to go from Cape Town to Joburg via Uppington. Well, now we've got a different set of routes, eh? We could go all the way up here along the N7, then cross on the N14 to Uppington, and then carry along this N14 all the way into Gauteng. There are a number of routes we could follow. But as long as you get the idea that with the map, we're going to use that to plot our different routes. Okay, now, in this exam, the examiner gave a ruler. So if you look at this exam, and those of you who have hard copies of this exam paper at home, you'll notice that the question 2.1, there it is, from the 2011 paper 2, and it was their question 3.1. They gave a map, and then they gave a ruler, because the examiners were worried that there would be students who'd walk into the exam room without a ruler. Now, folk, I'd like to say this. When I go into an exam room, I should make sure I have a pen, at least one. I would say at least two, actually, in case something goes wrong with the one. And a pencil, okay? A rubber, a sharpener, and a ruler. And then, of course, a calculator. Now, I'm not going to use this ruler that's given to us. I brought a ruler of my very own into the studio, and we're going to use this, because I'd like to believe that you as good students out there would have had a ruler on your desk anyway if you wrote this exam last year, and you would rather have used the ruler. Okay, then this funny little thing drawn on the question paper. Right, let's have a look at our very first question now. So, the question says this. The family travelled from Pietermaritzburg to Johannesburg by car using the N3. Use the map and, if necessary, the ruler below. Notice the examiner saying, if you want to use the ruler I've given you, use it, but you can actually use your own, and that's what we're going to do. Okay? Right. So we're going to use the ruler below, if necessary, to find on the map to measure the distance in centimeters, that's important, on the map between these two cities. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the map. Now, I've caused a bit of a chaos with the map because I've drawn all over it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a nice thick rubber here and get rid of all these green lines I did everywhere. And now hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm looking for. So we're starting in Pietermaritzburg. There we are there. And we're going all the way to Johannesburg. And we're going to follow this N1 or N3 route over here. Okay. Now, folks, when I'm measuring a distance, it's kind of difficult to measure a squiggly line with a straight ruler, isn't it? But we're going to try and find sections of the road that are kind of straight, and we're going to try and measure it out. Now, in an exam, the examiner and the markers should give you a bit of a leeway, okay? So, let's have a look. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at this first part of the route from Johannesburg to Harrismith, it's kind of straight, okay? And I make it out to be round about 4 centimeters. So we're round about 4 centimeters from Gauteng to Harrismith. From Harrismith to where the N3 meets up with the N11 is round about 1.5 centimeters. So I'm going to say 1.5 centimeters. And then finally, from Caltech, no, well, not finally, because I'm going to do another 2 measurements. From this point here through to that point, I'm saying we're looking at about another centimeter. And then finally, to Maritzburg, about another 1.5 centimeters. Okay. Now remember, I said to you, the examiner and the marker should be a little bit lenient in saying, yo, you know what? It's tough measuring this with a straight ruler. We got to be a little bit lenient and give a bit of a giveaway. Okay. But if I measured this and said, you know what, this distance from this point here in Joburg to this point over here, that's around about 18 centimeters. Guys, then I've just missed the plot completely. And no examiner, no marker is going to be that lenient. Okay? So, how far is that distance in centimeters? So, let's measure it. So, I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, plus the half, I've got 8. Should we check that on our calculator? I'm sure we don't need to. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 centimeters. What did the question ask us? The question asked us, use the map below to measure the distance in centimeters. So we've done it, and we've said the distance is round about 8 centimeters. Okay, what's the next question going to say? It says now, hence. What's hence mean? Hence means because of what you've already done, you're going to do something else. Okay? Always ask yourself, in fact, don't ask yourself. You just know that if you see the word hence, it means because of the above question, you're now going to do something else. In other words, you are going to use what you've done already to calculate the next thing. So you can't separate the 2 questions. So hence, use the scale given on the map to calculate the actual distance in kilometers between these 2 cities. I say this to my students all the time, and folk, I'm going to say this to you. Whenever, ever you are dealing with a map and scale, write the following down. Map to real life. Okay? Map meaning, what's the measurement on the map? Real life is, what's the true measurement? So if I was traveling from Joburg and going off to Maritzburg, off I would go. And I would follow a certain route and keep going, keep walking. Okay? It would take me a few days, I can assure you. But on the map, it's only that far. Okay? But in real life, oh my giddy aunt, we'd be walking for days. Do you understand the difference between the map and real life? Now, let's go back to our map. Here's our map over here. And again, I'm just going to get rid of some of these lines so I don't cause too much confusion with you. And now, if we look at it, we know that from this point over here, okay, from the 0 to the 300, we're going to measure that. So let's use our ruler and let's do the measurement. Okay? And I'm going to say from my 0 to my 300, I make it out to being 43 millimeters, or 4,3 centimeters. So, what does that mean? That means that when I look at my map in real life, on the map itself, okay, 4,3 centimeters represents what? Do you remember? Let's have a look. Represents 300 kilometers. So 4,3 centimeters represents 300 kilometers. What do we want to know? We want to know how far is 8 centimeters. So we don't worry about the 4,3. We just want to know the 8 centimeters. Okay, and this is centimeters. Hey? Now, before I'll try and find 8 centimeters, what should I always try and find? I should try and find 1 centimeter. Remember, 1's my magic number when it comes to maps and scales. Before you try and find out the distance of 8 centimeters or 20 centimeters or 100 centimeters, always try and find out the distance of 1 first. So I'm going to say, right, if I know 4,3 is 300, represents 300 kilometers, what does 1 centimeter on the map represent? Now, how did I get 4,3 to being 1? I divided, and I'm going to use a different color for this, I divided that by 4,3. So what am I going to do to the side? Also divide by 4,3. So now what do I have? Well, I've got 300 kilometers divided by 4,3. Okay. And I'm not going to do that on my calculator right now. Okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it right at the end. Let's see now what I'm going to do. So I'm now saying, right, I know what 1 centimeter is. 1 centimeter on the map represents, in real life, 300 kilometers divided by 4,3. So what's 8 centimeters? Well, how did I get this 1 to become 8? The 1 to become 8, I'm multiplied by 8. And if I do that to one side, I got to do it to the other side. So I'm now going to say, all right, so I've got this 300 over 4,3, and I'm going to multiply it by 8. So I now know that 8 centimeters is going to represent so many kilometers. So let's take out our calculator. And we're going to say, right, here we go. We've got, let's push fraction button, 300 over 4.3 multiplied by 8. And I get an answer then of 558,14. 500, let's get a pen again, sorry. 558, what was she? 14, 14 kilometers. Folks, that's not bad, eh? I think we were kind of very close to being accurate here when we did our measurements, because the distance from Joburg to Durban is close on 600 kilometers. So going to Maritzburg, which is like 60, 70 kilometers less, you know what, 558,14 kilometers. I think we did a phenomenal job in getting that distance. Let's just recap quickly. What's the most fundamental thing that we have to do when we deal with Mapwork? We write 2 words. Map, real life. Because then you know what numbers are representing the map and what numbers are representing real life. And you know, folks, when we do that, it's very difficult to make mistakes after that. Okay, our next question now says this. The car traveled at an average speed of 110 kilometers per hour. They departed at 8:15 and planned to arrive in Joburg at 2:30. Determine whether they arrived at their destination at the predicted time. Use the formula distance is equal to average speed times the time. Okay, 2 ways of doing this now. The one, we can use the formula distance equals average speed times time. So we can try and say, well, if their average speed is 110 kilometers and they're traveling for so many hours, what's the overall distance that they can cover in that time? And we can see if they'd be able to cover 558 kilometers. Or we can say, you know what? Let's work out the amount of time. We know the distance and see what average speed they should be traveling to make that distance. So there are 2 ways of doing it, right? I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, let's use our formula as it is. And I'm going to say, right, the average speed. What is the average speed? 110 kilometers per hour. What is the time? Now we have to work out how long they're going to take. Well, if they leave at 8:15 in the morning, there it is, and they arrive at 2:30, let's try and work out how many hours they've been driving. So it's 8:15, 9:15, 10, 11, 12:15, 13:15, 14:15. That's 6 hours. So it's already 6 hours. And how many minutes? Well, from quarter past, from 15 to 30 is 15 minutes. So we're going to say 6 hours and 15 minutes. Now, folk, this is a paper 2, so I don't expect things to be very basic. What is time given in? We should have time as hours. Got that? What is 15 minutes in hours? So many students are going to say, oh, that is so easy. Check what we're going to do. We are going to say equals 110 kilometers per hour multiplied by 6,15 hours. And they're going to sit back, smile, relax, and say, we did it. And you know what? The marker's going to sit back, relax, and weep and say they didn't do it. Okay? They fell for the trick. Because 15 minutes is not 0.15 of an hour. Let's have a look at how else we could write this. We could actually say that this is the same thing as saying 6 hours. Now, how do we change minutes to hours? It's going to be 15 over 60 hours. So it's now 110 kilometers per hour multiplied. What's 15 divided by 60? Let's get our calculator out. And we're going to say, Mr. Calculator, what is 15 divided by 60? And we get an answer of 1 over 4 or 0.25. So it's 6. Oops, let's get that pen. It's going to be 6,25 hours. There's the 6. Okay, there it is. And the 15 over 60 is 0.25 or 0.25. Now it's easy, hey? Now we're going to say with our calculator, okay, 110 kilometers times 6.25 equals, and we would have covered 687,5 kilometers. So we're going to say, right, 687,5 kilometers. So if I travel for 6 hours and 15 minutes at 110 kilometers an hour, I will have covered a total distance of 687 kilometers. How far do I need to travel? Let's go back to our previous question. How far was it? It was 558, and we saying, well, we could cover 687. You know what? We can easily make it from Joburg to Maritzburg or Maritzburg to Joburg in 6.5 hours if we average 110 kilometers an hour quite easily. Okay? Lovely question, isn't it? Let's have a look at our next one. So our next one is this. The capacity of the tank is 60 liters. And the cost of fuel is 10 Rand 12 per litre. Obviously, this question was a few months ago because fuel's gone up to over 12 Rand now, isn't it? Before refueling, the fuel gauge indicated that the tank was half full. Verify, showing all calculations whether the fuel gauge was working properly. Okay, so here we go. Firstly, what does the word verify mean? Verify means prove that, okay? Prove that the gauge was working. So we know that the family left Pietermaritzburg with a full tank of petrol. Along the way, they stopped at a petrol station to refuel at that amount of money. Okay, we want to know that the tank was half full, okay, because the gauge is saying, hey, this tank's only halfway. So how are we actually going to do that? Well, we are going to say, well, if there are 60 liters in a tank, how much would 30 liters cost me? So I'm going to say, well, 30 liters left in the tank. We're multiplying it by 10 Rand 12 cents. Let's see what half a tank should have cost me. So we're going to say, right, 30 multiplied by 10.12 equals, and we get an answer of 303 Rand 60 cents. So I've got 303 Rand 60 cents. That's what it should have cost me to fill up half a tank. How much did I pay, though? Have a look at here. 455 Rand and 40 cents. It cost me an extra, what's that, another 150 odd Rand to fill that tank. In other words, my tank is saying, hey, we're halfway, but actually we're not. Because if it was halfway, it would have only cost us 303 Rand to fill it. It cost us more to fill it. So in other words, my gauge is not working correctly. So the answer says verify, showing all calculations whether the fuel gauge was working properly. So I'm going to say, therefore, the gauge is not working properly. Okay, so the gauge is not working properly. And folk, how do we know when we finished a question? We read the question again and say, have I answered it? So let's read it again. Verify whether it's working properly, and I've ended with saying, therefore, it's not working properly. Next one. If the car's fuel consumption was 9 litres per 100 kilometres, determine how far they were from Joburg when they refueled. Okay, so how far were they from Joburg when they refueled my actual tank? What we're going to do is say this. Right, so I know that for every 100 kilometers I travel, I'm using 9 litres of petrol. There it is. Every 100 kilometers, I'm using 9 litres of petrol. How many litres do I need to use to complete the whole journey? Well, let's have a look at it. So I knew that my distance was 558 kilometers. Hey? So we got 558 kilometers. If I divide it by 100, okay, it'll tell me how many 9 litres I need. So I divide it by 100, and I'm going to get an answer. My calculator is going to do that for me. 558 divided by 100 equals, and I get a wacko answer of 5,58. And I'm not going to simplify that. I'm leaving it as it, 5,58. So 5,58 times I had to have 9 litres of petrol. So we're going to multiply that by 9 litres. Why? Because every 100 I use 9 litres. Okay? So how many times am I going to have to use 9 litres? I'm going to need it 5,58 times. And we did that by saying my total distance divided by 100 is 5,58. And each time one of those represents 9 litres. So now we're going to say we've got that answer multiplied by 9 equals, and I'm going to have used 50,22 litres of petrol. So we've got 50,22 litres of petrol to do the entire journey from Joburg all the way through to Pietermaritzburg. But, folk, we put in petrol along the way. And we're asking, when we put in petrol, how far were we from Joburg? In other words, how many litres had we used at that stage? So if I look and I say, right, and this is a real tough question, hey, it's wonderful stuff. If I look at it, I'm going to say, you know what, we used 455 Rand 40 worth of petrol. And each litre cost me 10,12. So I can now work out how many litres I've used up to that stage. So I'm going to take out my calculator and say, right, so we've got 455.40 cents divided by 10.12 equals, and we get 45 litres. So we'd already used 45 litres. Okay, so we need to use 50 litres. We've used 45 litres already. So minus 45 litres. What's that going to leave me with? So that's going to leave me with 5,22 litres. Okay, so now we know they've only got 5,22 litres worth of petrol left to get to Joburg. Now, folk, do you remember, and I'm going to write it out like this. I'm going to say litres to distance. Right. And do you remember we said that 9 liters got them 100 kilometers? Okay? So every 100 kilometers they traveled, they used 9 liters. Now we want to know, well, how far are they going to go with 5,22 liters? But before I can find 5,22, what do I have to do? Remember we looked at it earlier when we were dealing with scale? Always going back to our magic number, number 1. So I'm going to say before I work out any number of liters, I want to know 1 liter. And we know, how did I get that 9 to become 1? I divided it by 9. What am I going to do this side? Divide by 9 as well. So I'm now got 100 divided by 9. That's how many kilometers I can do on 1 liter of petrol. So how many kilometers can I do on 5,22 liters? So what am I going to do? I'm going to take this 1 and multiply by 5,22 to get 5,22, which means this side now I'm going to multiply by 5,22 as well. So I've now got 100 over 9 multiplied by 5,22. And that will give me how many kilometers I still had to go. So our calculator is going to do the job for us. Here we go. We're going to say, right, fraction button, 100 over 9. Multiplied that now by 5.22 equals, folks, there's my answer, 58 kilometers. So we still had another 58 kilometers to go to get to Joburg. All right. You understand that? Sure, this was tough stuff, wasn't it? But we know it's a paper 2, so we knew that there was going to be quite a bit of hard work involved with that. All right. Let's have a look at our next question. It says here, describe in detail the shortest possible route using the national roads to travel from Port Shepstone to Uppington. Okay, let's go all the way back to our map, and we're traveling from Port Shepstone to Uppington. Okay, where's Port Shepstone? It's this tiny little town here along the south coast, and Uppington, woo, Doodle Darbar. Okay, right on top of our map over there. How are we going to do that? Okay, folks, so now there are several routes we're going to follow. Just to make life less complicated, let's get rid of that Maritzburg route there. Right, so how are we going to do this? Well, there are several routes we can follow again, but the question does ask us, which do you think would be the shortest route? Well, I would say one of the shortest routes is to go from Port Shepstone all the way past Ntata to East London, go along towards Port Elizabeth, traveling along the N3, suddenly then say, you know what, hold on, before we get to PE, let's turn up along the N10 and keep going along the N10 all the way straight through to Uppington. Okay. Other folk might say, you know what, why don't we do the following? And I'm going to get a different color pen here. Why don't we go from Port Shepstone, travel along the N2 to Durban, then get on the N3 and go all the way past Harry Smith, okay, get through Joburg, and then get on the N14 all the way through to Uppington. Now, folk, if you look at those distances, they're more or less the same kind of length, eh? So it all depends what route I'm wanting to go. So I can go along the N2 from Port Shepstone to Durban, then from Durban go up the N3, get towards Joburg, turn along on the N14 straight into Uppington. Or I could say, you know what, from Port Shepstone, let's just carry along the N3, we go, or the N2, go all the way to Port Elizabeth, up from Port Elizabeth along the N10 straight into Uppington. And you know what, if I was doing the trip, that's probably the route I would follow. Why? It's a less traveled route, and so I wouldn't have so much traffic along that N3 past Johannesburg. Well, folk, that was a phenomenal question. You know what? I think we need an ad break. So let's take one right now, and we'll come back and we'll carry on with another question. Well, welcome back, folk. Again, we're dealing with some map work. So far we've looked at a little plan, then we've looked at a huge map of South Africa, and now we're going to look at that map of South Africa again. But this time, someone's going to give us directions, and we're going to try and follow those directions. Let's have a look. So, use the map of South Africa to answer the following questions. Right, so, Mr. Naidu gave the following directions to Mrs. Kulomo using his cell phone. So, he says to her, now listen, lady, from George, travel north along the N12. So, let's find where is George. George is our little town over here. Here's George. Let's do that in a nice, wonderful orange. There's George. Okay, and he says, listen, from George you travel up north, and you carry along that N12. So let's do this. So here's from George, we're going past Oudtshoorn along the N12 all the way to round about Beaufort West. Let's see what they say. They say, travel along the N12. When you reach Beaufort West, which we did do, remember, there's Beaufort West over there. It says, now, take the N1 and travel through Bloemfontein to Pretoria. So we got along the N1, and we're going to follow this N1. There we go. And we're going all the way through Bloemfontein, right? And we're going to keep going all the way to Pretoria. Here's Pretoria. Now, what's our next instruction? Our next instruction is then travel along the N4 in a westerly direction. Now, folk, if north is up here and south is down here, west is this way, hey? So, let's go, and we're going to go along a westerly direction. The next town will be your destination. So, here we are in Pretoria. We're going in a westerly direction on the N14. Folk, the very next town is called Rustenburg. And so, we've now come into the town of Rustenburg. Let's watch that all over again. So we've travelled from George, we've travelled up north to Beaufort West, we've now travelled along the N1, past Bloemfontein, all the way to Pretoria. From Pretoria, we took the N4, we turned a sharp left, okay, all travelled in a westerly direction, and eventually we got to Rustenburg. Lovely type of question, hey? Now, the next map we're going to look at is of a actual kind of plan. Let's have a look at this. This question was adapted from, again, the November 2011. It was the paper 2, and so we're expecting it to be a bit of a challenge, and it was question 4.1 and 4.2. So let's look at it. The diagram below is the floor plan of Mrs. Wong's new home. There it is there, and you can see in her new home she's got a bedroom 1 and a bedroom 2. She's got a lovely lounge area, a kitchen, a bath. I presume this thing over here is the toilet, okay, and a lovely kitchen area with a sink over there. Okay, great. Now, the height of the inside walls of the rooms from the floor to the ceiling is 2,400 millimeters. The dimensions of the windows in each bedroom are 160 centimeters by 130 centimeters. In other words, they're 160 centimeters this way and 130 centimeters up. Okay, the height of the door opening is 2,14 meters. The following formula may be useful. I love it when examiners say that. They say, you know what, the following you might want to use. In other words, what they're actually saying, folks, is, hey, you will use this. So let's use it. And this is what they give you. Area is equal to length times breadth. Oh my goodness. You know what, folk, for a paper 2, for the examiners to give you this formula, that the area of a rectangle is length times breadth, you should know that by now. Now, in which general direction does the window in bedroom 2 face? So let's look at our house here. Nice, they're telling us that north is in this direction. Can you see that? So, what question now is, in which direction, general direction, does the window in bedroom 2 face? So here's bedroom 2, here's the window, it's facing a southerly direction. Because if north is going that way, folks, south is going this way. The same as that arrow. So my window is facing in a southerly direction. Right, enough of that. I'm sure we've got a much more complicated question. Let's have a look at this one. The area of a door opening is 9% more than the area of a bedroom window. Calculate the width of a door opening in meters. Let's think about this question. They're saying we've got a window and the door takes up 9% more area than a window does. Well, how much area does the window take then? Let's have a look. Well, we don't know, but we know the dimensions of the window. So let's find the area of the window. And we're going to say, right, the area of a window is going to be length times breadth. And remember, this examiner gave it to us. And the length, we told, is 160 centimeters. The breadth, or the height rather, of that window is going to be 130 centimeters. So we're now able to work out the area of that whole window. And with our calculator, we're going to say, right, we've got 160 multiplied by 130, which gives me 20,800 centimeters. So I've got 20,800 centimeter what? Centimeter squared. And this, guys, is our window, hey? This is my window area. So what's my door? Well, we know the door is 9%, has a 9% greater area. So let's find out the area of my door. So we're going to say, okay, so the door now, let's find that out. The area of the door is going to be the 20,800 centimeters squared plus what? Plus 9%. Let's get rid of this word door here. It's going to get in our way. Plus the 9% of that 20,800 centimeters squared. So it's the same as the 20,800 meters squared plus another 9%. So we've got 20,800 centimeters squared plus. Now, let's find out 9%. We've already got 20,800 on our calculator. We're going to multiply that now by 9%. Equals 1,872. So 1,872 centimeters squared. To that, we're going to add the 20,800 plus 20,800 equals, and I get an answer of 22,672. So it's going to be 22,672. 72. Now that's the area of my door. But folk, that's not what they're asking us, eh? Let's look at the question. The question is, calculate the width of the door. So how do we apply this? Well, we know again that area is equal to length times breadth. Now, we know the area of our door, don't we? We know the area is 22,672 centimeters squared. Do we know the length or the breadth of the door? Well, let's look at the question. We told you the height, which we could say is kind of the length, okay, the length times the breadth. The height of the door is 2,14 meters. Now, 2,14 meters, folk, I have a problem with that. Why do I have a problem? Because so far I'm dealing in centimeters. Now we get something weird in meters. Let's convert our 2,14 meters to centimeters. How many centimeters in a meter? There are 100. So let's take this 2,14, multiply it by 100, and I'm going to get 214 centimeters. So I'm going to go back to my question here and say, right, so the length is 214 centimeters times a breadth. How are we going to calculate the breadth? We're going to say the breadth is 22,672 divided by 214. Out comes the calculator. And it's 22,672 divided by 214, and we get a width of 105,94. So my breadth is going to be breadth equals, and our calculator said 105,94. 105,94 centimeters. Okay. Let's check. Is that what the question's asking us? It's saying the area of the door is so much, 9% more than the area of the window. Calculate the width of the door opening in meters. I'm glad I read that because I've got it in centimeters. How do we now change the centimeters to meters? We're going to divide by 100. So we're going to say, right, I have got this horrible number of 105,9439, dividing it now by 100, and I'm going to get an answer of 1,06 meters. So my breadth is actually going to be now 1,06 meters if I'm rounding it to 2 decimal places. Do you see how we took scales and we put it into working with areas? Okay, so we took a little bit of the scale section and the map section and we mixed it in with our volume and our areas and our mensuration section. All right, folks, I trust you've learned a lot. Our time is already up. Can you believe it? But hopefully you've learned from this. And remember, this section causes a bit of difficulty in those matric exams. So if I was you, I'd get past papers and do as many of these map type questions as I possibly could. Guys, have a great day and thanks for tuning in.